It's one thing to mark an anniversary, it's quite another to make something of it. So, what's the potential for a peaceful future? This is Counterpoint. Good evening. Now, tonight we mark the other ceasefire. 12 months ago tomorrow, loyalist terror gangs apologised to the families of those they'd killed during 25 years of violence, and they said it would not happen again. October the 13th, 1994, 6 weeks after the IRA ceasefire, the UDA, the UVF and the others said they'd embarked on a path of peace. And 1 year on, they seem to have kept their word. There's no telling, indeed, how many Catholic, nationalist or Republican lives have been spared in the year that there's been. On Counterpoint tonight, we look back at the events which led to the Loyalist ceasefire and look forward to what might happen next. The former UVF leader, Gusty Spence, announces and then pronounces on the Loyalist ceasefire.
Will universally cease all operational hostilities.
The so-called Combined Loyalist Military Command waited for 6 weeks after IRA guns were silenced to confirm their own cessation. But was it simply the suspension of Republican terrorism which persuaded the UDA, UVF and others to stop the killings?
As far back as before the Brook talks, there were those of us who would have been involved politically with the Progressive Unionist Party and other parties who were of the opinion that violence was fruitless. It was counterproductive, and it was helping to that deterioration of society take place. And we had come together and seen various sets of loyalist paramilitaries in order to attempt to persuade them that violence should stop.
And even before the IRA ceasefire had been declared, I think that they had been making inquiries about how genuine the Downing Street Declaration was and the principle of consent contained within that. And I think that whenever they were convinced, my understanding is that the CLMC had issued 6 points, and when those 6 points had been clarified for them by people that they respected and trusted, when that had been clarified for them, then they were content that the union was safe, and therefore there was no need for them to continue with violence.
But others had a hand, some of them red hands, in the decision to call a halt. Loyalist prisoners were asked if they were ready to become prisoners of a war that was over.
There was no problems whatsoever. They were 110% in favour of the ceasefire. So their input was very important.
Does that role continue? Are they still being listened to about this issue?
The loyalist prisoners? Oh yes. Well, I would think that there would be, although I wouldn't be really au fait with the situation. There's a welfare section that would go up and visit the prisoners. And as far as I'm aware, the loyalist prisoners are completely behind the ceasefire.
On the road in North Belfast, up until a year ago, a killing ground for loyalist terror gangs. The owner of a local taxi company reflects on changed times.
You were working under the threat of going out to work and not to come back. The industry was very badly run down. Drivers would have been busier than they normally would have been, quite simply because there wasn't enough drivers in the area to cover the work. And as you get busy, you take less precautions, trying to quicken up, trying to cover more work, trying to get people to where they're going to and coming from, basically. North Belfast was an area where to get taxi drivers was very, very, very difficult. To be honest and fair about it, the ceasefires really worked for us, but it took us 3 months to convince ourselves that it was going to last, The only thing we can say is let's hope it does last. Drivers are happier. It's easier to run. You're under less pressure. I can go home at night and put my head in the pillow and waking up the next morning, not to waking up to bad news of another incident, another shooting, you know.
Well, I think people have always been worried in North Belfast that loyalist terror gangs have used the Catholic population, if you like, as a hostage to say to them, you better tell the IRA to ease off or we're going to shoot more Catholics. That's what terrifies people, because no matter what people said to the IRA in the 70s and the 80s, it didn't stop them. They still continued to go out and shoot people, and loyalists still continued to shoot innocent Catholics. But I'm confident that the Catholic community does not want a return to violence, and that there would be no support whatsoever for a return to any kind of violent campaign. And I know that in the Belfast area, the Republican movement has no intention of recommencing any kind of violence, and have made that clear publicly.
After the trauma as post-traumatic stress, but it only becomes a disorder when the person doesn't make that recovery and readjustment into normal life. But that they...
Belfast this week, and at a gathering of those directly touched by the Troubles, other anniversaries are marked. They are those of the husbands and sons who died when gunmen and bombers struck. Some may forgive, none will forget.
If an IRA man had shot my husband, I could have coped with that, and better than I was able to cope with the fact that he was shot by somebody from his own community, somebody that lived near us, somebody that had obviously been watching him and watching his movements. And I hope that they don't start up again, because I really don't think I have public support anymore, because people's had over a year of relative peace, and we can all go down the town. We're not going to be blowing up them. If the loyalists break this ceasefire, they break all credibility.
I just feel worse now, because I feel, why did he have to die? And I can't get no satisfaction or comfort from the peace, just that I hope nobody goes through it.
How can you trust people that have murdered people for years and years and years? You can't do. Trust has to be built upon, and it has to grow. You have to build trust. It'll be a long time before people in Ireland can really trust each other.
There's a great deal of confusion and hurt and some bitterness, because it's all over as far as the press and the media and the rest of the public are concerned. But these people have to live the rest of their lives, and their lives will never be the same again. And they keep asking, why me? Why was my husband chosen? Why was our father chosen? And in many ways, they're forgotten in the euphoria of the peace and the ceasefire.
And people having sleep disturbance and so on.
The pain of the past will be hard to soothe, but the bottom line from the hard line is that the talking must soon begin.
I say the dialogue must start now. It's important. There is an impasse. It's not an impossible impasse. If people hold on any longer or for any length of time, the impasse could deepen. The dialogue must start now. Whatever formula is found for dialogue, let it be through a talking shop like the Assembly or whatever, or a convocation or a convention or whatever. Get round the table. Start talking now.
I personally have no problem. As an individual, I would have no problem doing business with them. I think it will have to come to terms with each other. I think we'll have to recognise and respect each other. I don't feel that that's happening. I don't think that I have learned to recognise and respect that the nationalists in this country want to be Irish and only Irish. I'm happy enough to be British, and they have difficulties with coming to terms with my Britishness, and they have difficulties in recognising that people like me are the British presence in Northern Ireland.
Loyalist and Republican ceasefires 1 year on. Could we have been marking an anniversary of an end of violence from much longer ago?
And at time across 1972, the official IRA said that they had no wish to bomb 1 million Protestants into an All-Ireland Republic. The Provisional IRA have said something similar. 25 years on, it could have been said at that time. However, within that, I believe that the real hard work will come whenever people sit down together in dialogue, face to face, across the table, without recrimination or acrimony or anything else, to hammer out the best possible deal so that Northern Ireland can move into the 21st century in peace.
52 weeks. A long time in terrorism. But how much longer will it last? Is the loyalist ceasefire, as we once asked of another group, permanent?
I certainly feel that the ceasefire's safe. I mean, there's no when we hear talks of crisis from the Republican side and targeting, you know, on loyalists and on some of the fringe party representatives, that sends negative signals, and people are nervous and concerned about that. But again, I mean, there's continual ongoing attempts to keep people calm and to ensure that nothing's likely to happen.
As far as I'm concerned, that we've entered a new phase this year, and I simply wish that this vacuum that we're in at the moment would be brought to an end, where politicians can sit around a table and do what they're supposed to do.
All the signs are there. What's the alternative to the ceasefire holding? I was speaking to a very influential Irish American whenever we had visited America, and we were chronically honest with him. And fair play to him, he was chronically honest with us. And I said, I don't want you to avoid the question. I want you to tell me about the ceasefire. If a group goes back up, I didn't mention the IRA, but he knew that I was speaking about the IRA. I said, if any group goes back to violence, what will happen? He says, as far as we're concerned here in America, the ceasefire is irreversible. And any group that goes back will be swatted like a gnat.
So, where do we go from here? Is decommissioning a roadblock or a red herring? And will the loyalist fringe parties talk to Sinn Féin while mainstream unionists will not? Well, representatives of the SDLP and Sinn Féin are in our Derry studio. An expert on the workings of the Republican movement joins us from Dublin. And here in the Counterpoint studio, we have a broad range of political opinion, including those who have a vested interest in a permanent end to loyalist violence. Now, Gary McMichael of the Ulster Democratic Party, the statement from a year ago talks of guarantees, it talks of confirmation, as well as other assurances, pretty vague other assurances. That presumably included a message from Dublin.
Well, I think at the time considerations were taken and assurances were sought from many and wide variety of sources. But I've got to remember that this is a process that was in the making for 4 years. And in that respect, the decision to embark upon a road towards an eventual end to violence was the most important step, not necessarily the final elements of that. And of course, assurances were sought, and of course, assurances were given. But it was the basic concept of a need to end the violence, a need to create an opportunity for political development where we could finally end forever the need to use weapons and violence for political ends, which was the decision, which is the fundamental core of why the ceasefire happened.
Could I ask the question another way and suggest it wasn't so much a question of getting assurances from Dublin, but in fact you went to Dublin to get those assurances?
Well, I didn't go anywhere.
But members of the loyalist fringe parties went to Dublin and got the assurances from the horse's mouth before the call to ceasefire.
Well, I wrote a letter to Albert Reynolds publicly in 1994, the beginning of the year. And in relation to that, that was the only contact I had with Dublin.
But not the only contact others had, Billy Hutchinson.
Well, I mean, I think it's well known. I think Billy Wright has admitted in an article in the Telegraph that he actually met with some people. Progressive Unionist Party and others before them sought assurances from all over the place, not only from Dublin but also from America. And I think that irrespective of the statement being vague, I think that we're in the year of a ceasefire, and I think that the Progressive Unionist Party on the UDP, to their credit, were right, and the other Unionist parties were wrong. I think that there was no deal for the IRA. I think that's blatantly obvious. And I think that what the IRA did was that they decided that they felt that they could achieve a united Ireland by political means for no other reason. But everybody talked of some sort of secret deal done, and everybody told us we were sold out. And once again, I think I've heard that every year for the past 30 odd years that I can remember. I'm 40 now, and I can remember from I was 10-year-old being told it was sold out. But I'm still British. I'm still part of the union, and I obviously believe that I'll still be part of the union when I die. But we'll continually be told that we've sold out.
Tim Coogan in Dublin, I presume you can, as you've studied this, you can confirm that the IRA were not given a deal.
No, absolutely not. In fact, I'd imagine some of the wilder spirits, had they known this far down the line that so little had been achieved, they wouldn't have gone for the ceasefire. There was no deal. It was just an act of faith. There's a particularly good cadre of leadership, and they looked at the moment. They looked at the fact that Irish America was on board. They would understand that people like Billy Hutchinson and Gusty Spence and the rest would be coming from the same general background they would, and they knew they could talk to them. And they certainly had Albert Reynolds and John Hume, I suppose. So with that very fortunate concatenation of events, they made a leap of faith and imagination and went for it.
To what extent do you think Dublin and Albert Reynolds sealed the Loyalist ceasefire 6 weeks later?
Sealed it or failed it, sorry?
Sealed it.
Oh, I think that the Loyalists had their intermediary. I would say you should give great credit to the Reverend Roy McGee. I think you should give a lot of credit to Albert Reynolds and to Gusty Spence and these people. And I think they all trusted each other, and they reckoned there was a moment when you should listen to the hoofbeats of history, and they did. That's how it was ceased. I think men trusted each other.
Mitchell McLaughlin, what did you think when you heard 6 weeks after the IRA announced the ceasefire that the Loyalists were following suit?
Well, obviously delighted, and I think we should acknowledge the discipline and the control that has been demonstrated over the past 12 months. And I believe that the Loyalists have delivered on their side of the bargain. It is a pity that the impasse which has developed has actually prevented the dialogue being deepened and made more meaningful.
I mean, 12 months on, you're very disappointed with what you heard today at the Tory conference from the Secretary of State.
Yes, absolutely. I think recooking proposals which have already failed is hardly the imagination that the situation requires, and I think yet another opportunity has been wasted.
Gary McMichael, do you agree with that?
Well, Sir Patrick Mayhew's proposals aren't entirely new to us. I think what we have to look at is where we are now, and we have to find a formula. We have to find a mechanism for trying to overcome the present impasse. But in saying that, everybody has a responsibility to do what is necessary to find the balance between what is desirable and what is achievable. And the impasse, which revolves around decommissioning, has to be dealt with. It has to be seen to be dealt with, because it is not, in my belief, the paramilitary organisations who fear each other. It is a fear within the community that those paramilitary organisations will resume violence, which is the core element, which is the backbone for the pressure against unionist parties involving themselves in the talks. And we have to create an environment, through whatever means, that it is unreasonable for political parties to exclude themselves from dialogue.
Jim McDowell, you're a journalist, and as you listen to Mitchell McLaughlin, you listen to Gary McMichael, do you hear the same language?
I do, yes. I think it's the real dilemma here is not about who moves where or who moves what. It's about the dynamic. A year ago, or on August the 1st, when the IRA ceasefire was announced, I was asked up onto the Shankill Road to do a radio programme, and while the politicians, the mainstream politicians, and you know who I'm talking about, were sabre rattling and saying they would not take on the IRA ceasefire, 11 people from the Shankill, Billy Hutchinson was there, Eddie Kinner was there, Glenn Barr was there, the Reverend McGee was there. They went out that night at 6 o'clock, and the first question I put to them on this radio program, and it was raw radio. I made my criterion quite clear from the start, and I said, I'm going to ask you all a question. Do you reject out of hand the IRA ceasefire? And all of those people sitting in the heart of the Shankill Road said no, that they would take it on board and they would work towards something else. That something else came 6 weeks later, but there needs to be a new dynamic now. If it's in an assembly, if it's wherever, it's got a convention or wherever it's going to be called, I think that the fringe loyalist parties who represent the working class people, mainly in Belfast or Derry or whatever, I think that there needs to be a forum created whereby they can go to the ballot box, they can be accepted, and they have a mandate through their own volition. That dynamic needs to be created somewhere along the line. And I think that we will see in Belfast City Hall, the real puzzle to me is that in Belfast City Hall, we have Sinn Féin and Loyalists sitting on all the principal committees. Why can't we move that onto another plateau? Why can't we take it a stage further? And why can't they do it at Stormont or wherever else? Simple as that.
Well, let me throw out a reason why that might be. Because the government doesn't see any particular need for it.
Well, the government should see a need for it. I mean, if there is an expression of non-violence, if these people have come from organisations which 13 months ago, 14 months ago, were still out there killing people, and if it is now dialogue rather than direct confrontation that is the chemistry whereby people can get together, what's the big problem? The people out in the street in Belfast, in Dublin, in Derry, wherever, they are glad to have the peace to hold it and to lock it in. Move it on, just take it to a different dimension and let it lock in itself.
Now, Sandra Peake, you work for the organisation we saw in the report there. You deal with supporting and counselling people who have lost loved ones. A brief question which we'll explore again after the break. Are you redundant or are you busier?
We're busier. We would have approximately 80% increase in our phone calls from people seeking support and counselling. And these 80%, these are not from people who have been bereaved quite recently. These are people that have been bereaved maybe up to 20 years ago or more.
Let's explore it later. We just need to take a quick break. Back in a couple of minutes. So, a support group for the relatives and friends of victims has seen an 80% increase in business since the ceasefires. Now, Sandra Peake, why is that?
I think really the main reason is that for probably during the Troubles, people were living on a high. There were sometimes when they were bereaved of their loved one, it was followed closely by somebody else being bereaved. And for that reason, maybe they didn't have ample time to grieve properly. Another reason possibly is that in terms of whenever paramilitaries have come into people's homes, people were maybe afraid to speak out, afraid to show their feelings in case their relatives would ever become involved in terms of retaliation. And I think that was really one of the another main reason why people maybe now are starting to feel their loss and start to feel the need for support and for help, in dealing with it.
So while a lot of people are celebrating that it has ended, some people are only starting to begin to cope with the downside. And it goes back 20 years? It
can go back 20 years. We've had numerous phone calls recently from people who've been bereaved maybe 14, 15 years. And I think at that stage families would begin to say, well, why you should be getting over it by now? And that's just not the case. There is a need to talk to other people. The services that WAVE offers are to support and to let people get group support in talking to other people who've had similar experiences. And I think that's very important.
Rosalind Hughes, you were a nurse in the community in Belfast, including the Ormeau area. What sort of feedback do you pick up?
I pick up that there's an awful lot of, the community relations is very bad, Mike. And I would like that something could be done about that, actually, that people would trust each other more and do something, to help.
How does it come out? Are we still talking about tension? Are we still talking about bitterness?
Bitterness, yes, and quite a bit of hatred, and that goes right across, I think, the whole community, unfortunately.
Mark Durkin, do you pick that kind of sense up in Derry? And I ask you as a senior representative of the SDLP, whose party leader takes a lot of credit, along with Gerry Adams, for the Hume Adams dialogue, which a lot of people say was the start of this process. That may have come a long way, but the bitterness and the resentment and the bigotry is still there to be tackled.
Oh, yes, it is. I mean, the Hume Adams initiative, as the two principles always stated, was aimed at creating conditions in which there would be a cessation of violence. And that cessation of violence would itself present the prime condition for actually addressing all the other outstanding and very deep-running issues. And the problem is that a year on from the double-barreled ceasefires that we got last year, that there does seem to be more recrimination than reconciliation in the air. I mean, yes, I understand exactly what Sandra was saying about the degree of hurt that is there and the way in which it is manifesting itself. I mean, in many ways, that's been one of the problems with the cessations and the way in which they happened. It did add to the sense of futility for those who have been bereaved through violence. And that sense of hurt is something that we all must try to address. But we also have to try and address the real sense of hope that was created by the ceasefires. And I think the way in which we accommodate both is by achieving real political purpose on using the opportunity that Billy referred to earlier. And it's if we can do that, then we can go forward. It is a pity, you know, that we mark anniversaries so much, looking back in the past, over the past year, about what has or hasn't happened. The challenges haven't changed. The opportunities haven't changed. What concerns me is the urgency with which some people want to address them does seem to have changed.
Could I make
Tim
an
Pat,
intervention? As an outsider from Dublin, one of the challenges struck me very forcibly the other day. I was in Belfast. I was going to a book signing, and we couldn't get up the Falls Road. We had to juke in and out away up the mountains and down before we came to the centre where the signing was held.
Why was that?
Because there were an enormous number of secondary school children coming out on the Falls Road. Some 10 secondary schools disgorging their pupils, their parents picking them up, them on bicycles. Now, at the same time, I understand there's only one or possibly two secondary schools in the Shankill Road. I think Bishop Points said at the Upsal Commission there was one. I'd like to ask Billy Hutchinson, seeing that it seems to be one wall down here, there isn't a Unionist party or a DUP representative here. What is all this for what? We're talking about the ceasefire. Now, we've got to get over the hurt. We've got to go someplace. Now, education is the bread of the future. It looks to me as though there's a deficit, a leadership deficit, that something should be done to provide those basic provisions on the ground, to provide loyalists with some fear, some barrier to the fear of just being alienated from England, from, swamped by Catholics, and becoming just disaffected, lumpen, unemployed proletariat. Is that not one of the challenges that should be talked about and should be addressed?
I think that's to you, Billy.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's a challenge for people in my party or the people we represent. I don't feel that we would be swamped by Catholics. I think that we'd be very confident about being able to handle ourselves politically. There's no question about it, particularly the area where I come from in the Shankill. It's very disadvantaged in terms of education. But that's for a number of reasons. It's to do with tradition as much as anything else, and it's also to do with Tory policy. And unfortunately, until we get rid of Tories and get a Labour government, then we're still going to have the problems of education. We're going to have to try and change that, but that's something that our party wants to do. And I can understand what Tim Pat's saying, but I would say to him that there is a new brand of unionism that's coming about, and it will stand up and it will argue its corner. And it is based on education, and it's not just about educating people in schools, it's about educating them about life and educating them about other cultures and also about other political ideologies. And I don't think that any man or any woman should fear another political ideology, particularly whenever you've got one of your own that is as valid as any other. And I think that unionism is as valid as nationalism, and I think that that's what we have to do. We have to learn to cope with both, and we have to learn how to respect the others. And I think that we are starting to do that, and I think it'll take time, but in 10 or 12 years' time in this country, I think that we will have come to terms with each other, and we will start living life to the full in Northern Ireland as they do in other parts of the UK or in the other parts of Ireland.
Well, now, if we start reading the manifestos and the party policies from the likes of yourselves and the likes of UDP and the likes of Sinn Féin, I think we might find that on education, on social inclusion, on justice, etc., 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 you actually could do business, couldn't you?
Well, in terms of socio-economic issues, I'm sure we could. I think that, how I would describe it is that we've got common experiences, and that's because we come from working class backgrounds. There's a lot of things that divide us as well. I mean, if you look at education might be one. If you look at the education in Catholic Ireland, it's controlled by the Catholic Church, and they're not prepared to give it up. And if you look at things like abortion, we probably would be divided there as well. I would say that Sinn Féin and the DUP would probably have more in common with abortion, or the SDLP or whatever, than we would. But I mean, those are other issues, but certainly there are common issues that there are in terms of socio-economic issues.
Rachel McLaughlin, could you do business with both the DUP and the PUP?
Well, we're already doing business with the DUP on the councils, and I'm absolutely confident that we'll do business in the future with the Loyalist parties. I actually agree with Tim Pat that they represent a breath of fresh air. They demonstrate the evidence that we're not dealing with the unionist community in monolithic terms. There is a debate within that community, which I think is reciprocated within the nationalist community and gives me great expectations for the future.
Well, could I just say that it struck me that one of the danger signals I've been seeing for some years was that the elite, it seems to me, the professional classes are sending their children to be educated in England, and they're lost then to the community. So that's the next cadre. So it seems to me that in a very particular way, the Gary McMichaels and the Billy Hutchinsons and all the other people really have to make common cause with the working class on the other side, because they're going to be left here. The other people can take root. We could take flight rather, but you're here, and I think, and we're here. So I do think education is the way forward, and certainly, I mean, abortion, and we are having this big debate now about divorce, which will be some sort of a defining moment. But I think all these things are passing. Our young people here don't look at those things at all. I mean, their instinct is not to dominate the North, but just to go up there out of curiosity and to live together. It just seems to me that the whole hang-up at the moment on the constitutional issue, and Paddy Mayhew's statement today and somebody else's tomorrow, is missing the real point, that really on the ground these issues should be addressed, and the more they are addressed, the more the other issues will solve themselves.
Was it the case, Jim McDowell, in the late 60s, that there was a movement to try and bring the working classes together, and it didn't work?
Well, it doesn't work. I mean, people are talking about sectarianism as if it's a banned word, it's a censored word. We've got to live with sectarianism, but we've got to live with it positively. I was in the Armour Road on August the 12th when the Apprentice Boys Parade came down. I was in Derry later that day. I've seen naked sectarianism like I haven't seen since the late 60s, 70s. But we've all lived in ghettos, not only physical ghettos, housing ghettos, ghettos of the mind. And you can't suddenly take two sets of people and try and crush them together. You can't have a nationalist parade, a Sinn Féin parade, coming into Belfast city centre with a busload of people coming from Rathcoole or whatever to the end of Royal Avenue saying, let us get at them. To me, that's positive. You've got to face that. You've got to face it down. You've got to face sectarianism where it occurs, and you've got to go on that. But there's a fundamental issue here that loyalist people want to know. You see, I have been a reporter of the terror war for 25 years. I never thought that the long war would stop, and perhaps Mitchell McLaughlin could address this. I thought there were two primary and crucial conditions. Number one, that the IRA would get a timescale for withdrawal, formally or informally. And we had the talks that went on until, was it last February, whenever somebody lifted the lid and blew the gaff on it, that the IRA would only accept two primary conditions. Number one, a timescale for withdrawal. Should it be 25 years, the British become persuaders, we are out in 25 years, and that's it, folks. And prisoners out. Now, the prisoners are going to be out within 2 to 5 years. But the other thing that loyalist people on the ground are really worried about is, has there been formally or informally a guarantee given to the IRA and Sinn Féin that there is a timescale for withdrawal? And that's a question that perhaps needs to be a fundamental question that needs to be addressed from the loyalist community.
Mitchell McLaughlin, do you want to answer that?
The short answer is that there are no secret deals, and I'll be the third contributor to this programme to say so. We have said, when we went back into our own community, we made it absolutely clear, because we were sensible enough to know that we were dealing with a peace process to which the British government had not signed up, that it was crucially important that our own supporters understood that there was no secret deal, that there was no hidden agenda, that this was a question to be resolved purely through the political process. And Sinn Féin, and I have to say the UDP and the PUP, have been demonstrating their credentials for some considerable time. And we believe that it is becoming increasingly obvious that the people who are frightened by political change are in fact the British government.
And Gary McMichael, in terms of the speed of the process, if it is true that the gun is out of Irish politics, period, forever, never to come back, does it not follow that there can't possibly be a real crisis anymore because you can't return to violence?
Well, if that's the case, why are people in my community afraid and anxious because Sinn Féin were talking up the crisis? We're telling us that the peace process was in crisis in the past months. You know, I mean, everybody talks about this decommissioning issue. I have to say again, the problem isn't in building confidence necessarily between the paramilitary organisations. It's dealing with the anxieties and the fears within each counterpart community. And the loyalist paramilitary groups have sought to deal with that. They have offered reassurances to the nationalist community that there will be no first strike, no initiation of violence, that they're totally and exclusively committed to peaceful methods. But the IRA have done nothing. And I think this is a tremendously important issue. The IRA have done nothing to seek to make the to build trust with the unionist community, done nothing to deal with the credentials which are lacking about their commitment to peace. The question has to be asked is this war over or is it not?
But what about the Irish News on Tuesday morning, where you see Gerry Adams quoted almost verbatim Article 10 from the Joint Declaration Statement? We are totally committed. The achievement of peace must involve a permanent end to all violence.
Yes, and an important statement it was too. But the IRA directly must be seen to deal with this. They have to make an implicit and explicit assurance to the unionist community that this war is over and that there is nothing to fear from dialogue, because it is the community themselves who are uncomfortable. And if we attempt to enter into dialogue while there is no trust between the communities, then how can we possibly build a settlement? And each participant has a responsibility to understand the fears of the other and to deal with them.
Okay, well, we think we got to past 20 past 11 without bringing up decommissioning. I hope we don't get stuck with it entirely in part 3. Join us after the break. In the early days of the ceasefires, there were two big issues, namely the guns and the prisoners. And Billy Hutchinson, the prisoners seem to have taken a back seat. They're no longer top of the media agenda. Why is that?
Well, they're no longer at the top of the media agenda, but they are still top of our agenda in terms of we believe that they should be released. The reintroduction of 50% obviously isn't enough, but we believe that it's at least it's created a spirit of intent by the government. One of the problems when we talk about prisoners is the feelings of victims, and we've always tried to be very careful about how we do that. We aren't going to hide behind anything. We want our prisoners out, but what we also want people to realise is that the families of those prisoners are also innocent victims. And over this last lot of years, there has been, well, since 1987 or 87, there's been over 370 Loyalist and Republican lifers released. And what I would say to people is, what happened to those victims? How did they cope with those people being released? And I think that what we shouldn't do is hold the people who are in prison now hostage for the last 25 years, because they haven't been responsible for the whole of the last 25 years. But there's no doubt about it. We have to take into consideration the victims as well. But that can't be taken into consideration just by holding the prisoners forever. We can't hold them responsible.
Mark Durkin, are these issues where the SDLP kind of have to take a bit of a back seat and leave it to the fringe loyalists and to Sinn Féin?
No, none of us should take a back seat as regards these issues. I think it's significant that the prisoners have themselves made sure that they are not putting themselves above the process. The prisoners have made it clear that, for instance, they don't want gestures made on the prison's issue at the expense or as a substitute for actually moving the process along. And I think those spokespersons for some parties who this time last year were saying that the ceasefire was all a ruse aimed at just simply people getting into talks, or all a ruse aimed at getting prisoners out and was only for short-term gain, now do need to take stock in terms of the year that we've had, and given the patience that has been shown by the prisoners and by their families. And I think now if people have been using that situation to try to test whether or not the ceasefires were just a short-term tactic as opposed to the beginning of a longer-term strategy, longer-term alternatives and a new opportunity for all of us, do need to take account of those things and move forward. And I think there's more adjustment needed by those who have said throw away the key as far as the prisoners are concerned, and is needed now from the prisoners and those parties associated with the prisoners.
Sandra Peake, how do the relatives and the friends of the dead feel about the prospects of early releases?
Well, WAVE is a cross-community organisation, so really there's been great diversity among its members and how they feel in relation to the early release of prisoners. I know that they feel that they're part of the peace process, so they wouldn't want the peace process to be hindered by their views, but certainly there's a lot of anger in relation to the early release. Many view them just as simply criminals. I mean, when they look at the long-term effects for their families, the implications for their children, if their children witness the death of their father, brother, etc. I mean, I think people feel, I mean, that's quite a contentious issue there, really, in terms of, letting people be released.
Yes, how do you think they feel about the fact you're even taking part in this discussion and sitting beside two representatives of the loyalist fringe parties?
I think that in terms of, there's mixed views really. I know that people, and this has been expressed, our conference on Tuesday was aimed to let people have a voice, let them talk about the issues which were important to them. And one of the things that came out of it was that people didn't want to be a hindrance. They wanted to see peace continue. They never wanted another family to suffer in the way that they had suffered. And I think that that's one thing, that they do want to work together, but there are problems with that, just as, you know, in relation to building trust between people. And that's one of the things that our groups across community, there's problems in relation to building trust between people, even to open dialogue, to talk to each other.
Rose, do you think that letting the prisoners out would overall help or hinder in the sort of areas we are working?
I think it would help a lot of people if they did come out, because it's their conscience at the end of the day that's going to trouble them, isn't it? You know? I mean, they're the people that have destroyed a lot of families, unfortunately.
Even though there would be children running around who might be looking at the man who murdered his or her father?
Yeah, that's very sad. You know, there's an awful lot of prisoners in their own home because they were bombed or shot, unfortunately, through some prisoner, you know.
And that's the price they're going to have to pay if this is going to stick, or not.
Unfortunately, yes.
Tim, Pat Coogan, isn't that a much bigger price to ask people to pay than asking for a few guns to be handed over?
Well, it is, it is and it isn't. It's an appalling thing. But honestly, I feel that the hang-up on the prisoners issue was less to do with the decent sensitivities and the hurt of the people in Northern Ireland than Tory party backbench politics and their interaction with the unionists, the official unionists, the people who are not on your programme tonight because they won't come. At the end of any war, no matter what foul deeds are done, people have got to be let out. Now, I don't want to get into a kind of an argy-bargy, but Clegg was out and a lot of people are still in. The Shankill butchers are out, they've done their sentence. We have to live in Ireland, in this small country, and we're all involved in this, with major roads, with the ability to hire a car. There is no safe hiding place in this country from anybody. I think the prisoners have to get out. They're all caught up. They're all victims of this revolution, of this awful cycle of violence we're visited with and that we now have a chance of getting out of. And I don't think that the few guns is a small matter. I think it's part of this larger picture with this interaction between the Tories, the Tréason de Klerk. I think that the decommissioning issue is the current contemporary version of playing the orange card. And I don't think it's been played for the benefit of the people of Northern Ireland. I think it's been played for the benefit of people in Westminster. I don't think that, for example, it was any use to the people of Northern Ireland when President Clinton held that enormous Washington Economic Conference in May, which was, by several commentators' estimate, the greatest American potential for investment in Europe since Marshall Aid, which would have done more and will do more in terms of jobs, and I'm sure it will happen. I have a sense that the Americans, even in the next few days, are going to send a signal to us all that something important and good is going to happen. But wouldn't it have been far better for the British, for Sir Patrick Mayhew, to have taken that aboard and tried to further it than introducing yet another roadblock, this Washington test? The decommissioning does not occur anywhere in the Downing Street Declaration. It was put in afterwards as an afterthought because after the Maastricht Treaty the dependence on the Unionists became evident, and this thing has multiplied and grown and grown.
Yeah, but
like
there
prisoners,
is
guns have to be dealt with and put away.
Within the Downing Street Declaration, there is the establishment of a commitment to exclusively peaceful methods.
Well, I would have thought, let me say now, as a historian of the physical force tradition, the IRA in Ireland, I could never have envisaged 14 months of peace. They've shown colossal integrity and discipline, and I believe they mean to continue that way.
Mitchell McLaughlin, for the sake of a few guns, some faceless, unelected, unaccountable people, the IRA, are stopping you, the democratic politician, from getting to the round table talks. Do you not get fed up with that?
Well, they're not preventing me getting to the talks. It's the British government that's preventing me getting to talks. They're the people who reneged on the commitments given before the IRA decision was taken. And if we could just step outside of the Irish situation and look at the ceasefire that was announced in Bosnia today, everybody knows that unless they start talking immediately, that ceasefire situation will not last. And I'm not threatening anybody in Bosnia by pointing out that obvious fact. The British government are amongst the prosecutors for immediate and urgent dialogue in Bosnia. Why do they take a different attitude in Ireland?
Michael,
Could I come in there? I mean, to suggest that decommissioning and the decommissioning argument is playing the orange card, it's absolute claptrap. I didn't expect to hear that from Tim Pat Coogan, because there are two sides who are involved in the decommissioning issue here. It's not just the IRA. It's UVF, it's UFF, it's UDA as well, and they're involved in the decommissioning debate. And if only the loyalist people who had the vision and the dynamism last year to come along with the ceasefires would realise that they're sitting on the doorstep of one of their biggest, possibly their biggest propaganda coups ever. If the loyalist paramilitaries were to make the first gesture, where would that leave Sinn Féin? Where would it leave the IRA? And I mean, that's a question that must be addressed. Is there sufficient vision there for the loyalist paramilitaries to say, okay, we accept, we want the British link. We're going to establish and re-establish and say to ourselves that it's cemented in there with the British link, and the peace process is cemented in. They're sitting on the doorstep of the biggest propaganda coup they could come up with, if only they would realise it. Let them make the first gesture.
What about that?
Well, thank you for that one. No, that's a valid point. It's an absolutely valid point. I mean, this is not a new idea. This is not a new argument that has been put to us. We have consistently argued that what this is about is trying to do what's achievable. Now, the loyalist organisations, I believe, have went as far as they can go because of the nature of those organisations. The reason they exist is because of the IRA threat. The reason they retained weapons was because of the threat of violent action from republicanism towards their community. I believe that the loyalist organisations took a very courageous step last month when they sought to reassure the nationalist community that they would not initiate violence. Because again, this isn't about solely taking weapons, small amounts of weapons, out of the scene at this point, because that doesn't reduce the capability of violence. What it's about is creating confidence and building confidence within those who would suffer from those weapons if they were to be used. Now, the loyalists have taken extreme steps to deal with that, but Republicans haven't.
Well, you could ask Mr. McLaughlin if you were to recommend or make a plea for the loyalist groups to hand over a few weapons, would the loyalist community, the unionist community, be in any more danger? Would you like to ask him that?
Well, I think before anybody asks Mitchell a question, I think I'd have to say that I don't think Jim's point is valid, and I don't think Jim believes we're stupid either. From my point of view, in terms of a loyalist hand over guns first, isn't the question. It's not on for a number of reasons. What happens if the IRA don't reciprocate? The loyalists have then lost weapons which they didn't need to lose. What happens if the IRA believe that what the loyalists is doing is trying to put them behind the 8 ball?
But
and what happens? No, but let me finish my point. What happens if we actually force people back on an armed footing? We can't get involved in that sort of thing. If any decommission is going to happen, it has to be bilateral. It cannot be unilateral from the loyalists. And if the IRA do it first, then the loyalists have no need for their guns, and they can do it afterwards. But you know, we all have vision, and I think we have probably been the people who have been the visionaries over this last year and before. And I think we deserve a lot of credit. I mean, I know what Jim's saying, and it has been discussed, and it'll continually be discussed. But I would be one of the people in our party who would say that it's a no-go, that it's not even a valid argument.
There's been a lot of talk over this last year of those who have taken risks. Who's prepared to take the next one? Mitchell McLaughlin?
The SDLP are.
Well, it's a Sinn Féin, Michael. I mean, if for instance we come up with an 85, 87, 89 member assembly convention at Stormont, if it opens the door for Sinn Féin to become fully involved in the democratic process, David Trimble has already said that he will talk to Sinn Féin, or unionists will talk with Sinn Féin across the floor of a debating chamber in the assembly. Will Sinn Féin become part of a democratic system which sets up a new legislature, whatever the powers are at Stormont, and will they become involved in that democratic process?
Well, Mark Durgan said he was prepared to take a risk, or the SDLP is prepared. What's the risk you'll take?
Well, first of all, we're asking everybody to test us in relation to any talks. We're being accused, for instance, of having rejected the assembly issue. We're making it very clear that given that there are very confusing versions, for instance, of the unionist proposal being made, we want to hear our questions answered. We're prepared to be taken on the questions that we have actually asked. We're making it very clear as well that we want to take up things that Billy Hutchinson is saying. For instance, he said earlier on that as far as he's concerned, unionism is as valid as nationalism. That's something the SDLP believe in too. Unionism is as valid as nationalism, and vice versa. We have to take the risk of moving beyond working on the basis of mono-legitimacy, that things can only work out if they're legitimate according to the nationalist interest or according to the unionist interest. Things have to be bi-legitimate. That means we have to face into a process that is going to be about changing ourselves, not about changing all the others. It will actually be about changing ourselves. We're prepared to recognise that. That's part of the leadership that we offer, and it's part of the leadership that we want all other parties to test us on.
If you're optimistic, who do you look to make the next move? And briefly, please.
Well, it's not a matter of optimism in terms of who we need to look to make the next move. The fact is there is an impasse. This programme has become bogged down again on the decommissioning issue. Everybody know that there are various options there to move forward. People know the different options. People know their responsibilities. Billy Hutchinson mentioned earlier that people need to act according to responsibilities, and I hope everybody does that.
We got bogged down there, and that's where we finished. Gentlemen and ladies all, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And indeed, thank you for your company. Back next Thursday. Till then, from the Counterpoint team, good night.